A policeman attacked a pregnant woman in a wheelchair, not realizing who her husband was. What happened next shocked everyone. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. It was a warm, sun-drenched afternoon in Louisiana. Maria Stella, a vibrant, strong-willed black woman in her early 30s, wheeled herself out of the pharmacy. At 7 months pregnant, Maria navigated life with resilience. She'd lost her ability to walk a few years ago in an accident, but her spirit never wavered. With the baby on the way, she and her husband, Benjamin Frank, an FBI agent, were eagerly preparing for their new chapter together. As she turned onto a quiet road heading toward home, she felt the weight of the day beginning to lift. The pharmacy visit was quick, just picking up some prenatal vitamins, but the fresh air and a sense of normalcy felt good. Little did she know that a routine trip was about to turn into a nightmare. Maria was halfway down the road when she noticed a police car slowing as it approached from behind. At first, she paid it no mind, assuming the officer was passing through. But as the car came to a stop beside her, the uneasy feeling in her gut grew. The officer, a tall, imposing white man in his late 40s, got out of the car and walked toward her with a look that set her on edge. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice cold and authoritative. "What are you doing out here?" Maria glanced at him, confused by the aggressive tone. "I'm just heading home from the pharmacy," she responded, her voice calm and steady. The officer's eyes narrowed as he looked her over, and for a brief, tense moment, the world around them seemed to fall silent. His gaze shifted from her wheelchair to her pregnant belly, then back to her face, as if processing the sight of her, something that seemed to bother him. "I need to see some ID," he demanded abruptly. Taken aback, Maria furrowed her brow. "I didn't realize I was doing anything wrong. What's the issue, officer?" "Just show me your ID," he snapped, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Maria felt her heart begin to race. She reached into her bag, trying to remain calm. "I have my driver's license right here," she said, pulling it out and handing it to him. The officer barely glanced at the ID before scoffing. "You know, people like you," he began, his voice dripping with disdain, "shouldn't be out here alone. What if something happens?" Maria's pulse quickened, her anger rising alongside the fear. "People like me?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "I have every right to be here." The officer stepped closer, looming over her in an aggressive stance. "You know exactly what I mean," he spat. "Where's your husband? Shouldn't he be taking care of you?" Maria's stomach churned, but she held her ground. "My husband isn't here right now, and I don't need him to take care of me. I'm more than capable on my own." The officer's face twisted with anger. Without warning, he grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and violently shoved it backward. Maria gasped, her body lurching as the wheels skidded across the pavement. "You're coming with me," the officer growled. "I don't trust you being out here." Terror flooded Maria's veins. "What are you doing?" she cried, clutching her stomach protectively as the baby kicked inside her. "I haven't done anything wrong." Ignoring her protests, the officer began pulling her wheelchair toward his car. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, fear and rage battling for dominance. She struggled to free herself, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. "Let me go!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant!" But the officer showed no mercy. "I don't care," he sneered. "You're coming to the station." Just as Maria felt herself losing hope, a black SUV screeched to a halt a few feet away. The door flew open, and Benjamin, her husband, stepped out, his face a mask of fury. Dressed in his FBI jacket, he moved toward them with a deadly calm, the air around him crackling with tension. "Get your hands off my wife!" Benjamin commanded, his voice low and dangerous. The officer froze, his hand still gripping Maria's wheelchair. He turned slowly, his face paling as he saw Benjamin's FBI credentials clipped to his belt. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Benjamin barked, his body tense with rage. "That's my wife. She's pregnant, and you just assaulted her." The officer stumbled over his words, trying to justify his actions. I didn't know. She was being suspicious." "Suspicious?" Benjamin's voice was sharp as a blade. She's on her way home from the pharmacy. Suspicious of what exactly? Being black, being in a wheelchair, or is it because she's pregnant? The officer stammered, backing away as Benjamin's anger radiated off him in waves. I didn't mean... You didn't mean what? Benjamin's fists clenched at his sides. You didn't mean to shove a pregnant woman in a wheelchair, or you didn't mean to get caught? Maria's heart pounded, the shock of the encounter still heavy in her chest. But relief washed over her as Benjamin stepped between her and the officer. She knew he would protect her, that this man who had tried to intimidate her had no idea who he was dealing with. Benjamin leaned in close to the officer, his voice low and cold. You're done. I'll make sure you never pull a stunt like this again. The officer's face drained of color as he realized the full gravity of the situation. He stepped back, muttering weak apologies, but it was too late. Benjamin pulled out his phone, already dialing a number. Stay right here, he ordered the officer. You'll be answering for this. Within minutes, a police supervisor arrived, quickly assessing the situation as Benjamin relayed the events. The officer who had assaulted Maria was detained, his face now a mask of shame and regret. Benjamin knelt beside Maria, his eyes softening as he took her hand. Are you okay? He asked gently, his voice filled with concern. Maria nodded, though her body still trembled from the ordeal. I'm fine, thanks to you. He cupped her face, his expression filled with love and anger at what she'd been through. He'll pay for this, Benjamin promised. You'll never have to deal with someone like him again. Benjamin wasn't the type to let things slide, especially when it came to Maria. The very next day, he launched a formal complaint with the Louisiana Police Department, providing a detailed account of the assault his wife had endured. He wasn't just an enraged husband, he was a seasoned FBI agent who knew the law inside and out. This officer had crossed a line, and Benjamin was determined to make him pay for it. The internal investigation moved quickly. Given the severity of the incident and the undeniable evidence, witnesses, Maria's testimony, and Benjamin's presence as a federal agent, the officer was immediately placed on suspension pending further review. But that wasn't enough for Benjamin. He was going to ensure that the officer not only lost his badge but also faced legal consequences for his actions. While the legal process was set in motion, Benjamin also worked with a top civil rights attorney to file a lawsuit against the police department. The goal was not only to seek justice for Maria, but also to bring attention to the systemic issues that allowed officers like this one to act with impunity, particularly toward black citizens. The story quickly gained traction in the media, and soon, news outlets were covering the incident. The public outcry was immediate, with many expressing outrage over how a pregnant, disabled woman had been mistreated by someone sworn to protect the public. As the lawsuit moved forward, the police department, eager to avoid the growing PR nightmare, offered a settlement for damages caused to Maria, both emotional and physical. But Benjamin and Maria weren't interested in just monetary compensation. We want real change, Benjamin told their lawyer. This can't happen to anyone else. The department had no choice but to agree to a series of reforms. They promised to implement mandatory sensitivity training for all officers, focusing specifically on racial bias, interactions with disabled individuals, and de-escalation techniques. In addition, Benjamin insisted that the officer responsible for the assault face criminal charges. The district attorney, feeling the pressure from the FBI's involvement and the public outrage, agreed to prosecute. During the trial, Maria sat beside Benjamin, her hand resting on her now much larger belly. The courtroom was tense, and the officer, sitting at the defendant's table, looked smaller than he ever had on the street. He had tried to justify his actions, claiming he'd feared for his safety, but the jury wasn't buying it. The evidence was stacked against him, and Maria's composed yet emotional testimony swayed the jury. I'm not just a woman in a wheelchair. I'm a mother-to-be, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I feared for my child's life that day, and no one should ever have to experience that kind of fear at the hands of the police. It took the jury less than a day to return a guilty verdict. The officer was sentenced to prison for assault and misconduct, his career in law enforcement permanently destroyed. After the trial, the police department issued a public apology to Maria and Benjamin. The reforms that Benjamin had fought for were put in place, and the case became a catalyst for broader conversations about police conduct, particularly regarding how officers treat disabled and minority individuals. As the dust settled, Maria and Benjamin finally had a chance to breathe. They had won the battle, not just for themselves, but for countless others who might have faced similar injustices. One evening, as Maria sat in the nursery they had prepared for their baby, Benjamin came in and knelt beside her wheelchair. He gently placed his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "We did it," he whispered. "We protected our family." Maria smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And we made sure no one else will have to go through what we did." Benjamin kissed her forehead softly. "You were so strong through all of this," he said. "I'm so proud of you." "And I'm proud of you," Maria replied. "We fought together." The legal battles, the media attention, and the tension that had once hung over them now seemed distant. What remained was their love, their commitment to justice, and the promise of a better future for their child, a future where they could feel safe knowing they had fought for what was right. And as they held each other that evening, the baby kicking between them, they knew that they had won more than just a legal victory. They had won a victory for their family, for justice, and for hope. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.